If you've moved about in netball circles in New Zealand, you've probably heard the name Taini Jamison, and you're probably familiar with the Taini Jamison Trophy, which was named in her honour. But who was she, and what were her achievements? How did she leave such an imprint on the game? 27 years before her death in 2023, Taini was interviewed as part of a Netball New Zealand oral history project, and the recordings were preserved by the Alexander Turnbull Library. This story of Taini's life in netball features memories in her own words from those recordings. From humble beginnings to history-making World Cup coaching success and a lifetime of involvement in netball, we remember her as one of the true legends of the sport.
This is tape 3, side 5 of an interview with Mrs. Taini Jamison, and we're recording on a Sunny Machine TCM 5000 EV.
Waikato was the first team I went to a New Zealand tournament with. And I think we played in the snow down there, which was a new thing for us.
The year was 1949. The snow-covered asphalt courts of Memorial Park in Dunedin played venue to the 32 teams who had journeyed from across the country for the Women's 9-a-side Outdoor Basketball National Championships.
You had to pay money in to go. We paid our own way. And I think, from what I remember, we went by train, and by boat, and by train again.
What was the uniform then?
Gym frocks, white blouses, tie, belt, and you played with the tie on and the sleeves down.
And what about on your feet?
Wow, we had our long black stockings, of course. Everybody wore long black stockings. I think we were runners-up that year, Waikato were, so we were all in the B grade. Yes, there were 3 grades. You had to play up and win your grade 3 years in a row before you went up to the next grade. So it was hard. It was really hard to move up the ladder.
After her first appearance with Waikato, Taini returned to the National Championships for the next 9 consecutive years, representing her beloved hometown of Rotorua. They managed to advance to the A grade, which for Taini was one of her proudest achievements as a player.
My father was Te Rangi Ātāhua Kiniwea, and my mother was Te Pohi o Rā Kaiora. I was born on the 23rd of February 1928.
Taini grew up in Rotorua with her 4 older siblings. Her mother looked after them while her father did surveying for the Māori Land Court. Taini had a love of sports from a young age, a love that carried on throughout her entire lifetime.
What are the games that you used to play at that time?
Oh, we played marbles, of course, and jacks, and of course we played netball, or basketball and that. We just loved playing it, and we played all the different schools around Rotorua. Not that there were many at that time, but we did.
At this period in Taini's life, netball wasn't called netball. It was called outdoor basketball. It was a modified version of basketball that was played outdoors exclusively by women. It first appeared in New Zealand in the early 1900s, and photographs from that time show ladies in long dresses and hats playing on grass, shooting the ball at cane baskets held up on poles. It's uncertain why the sport was modified for women, but there's a common belief that dribbling the ball like in the men's game was removed because it was considered unladylike, and the heavy skirts and long sleeves that girls had to wear were too restrictive anyway. It's believed that extra players were added to teams so more women could participate, and lines were drawn on the grass or asphalt to stop them bunching at each end. As the 9-a-side game became more popular, it expanded geographically, but without any official rules, so the way the sport was played could be varied between regions. When Taini finished school, she had aspirations to be a dental nurse, but after missing out on a place in the training school, she began studying in Wellington to become a teacher.
That's where I learned to play indoor basketball. So that when we went on training college tournaments, I played basketball, indoor basketball, and I think I played table tennis too at one stage.
So sport played quite an important part in your life?
I loved sport. I mean, I would just do sport all day if I could.
So on the academic side at training school, was that okay?
Yeah, I managed that all right.
After gaining her teaching qualifications, Taini was posted for a term in a relieving placement at a school in Huntly. During that time, she successfully trialled for the Waikato rep team. And after playing in her first national championships in 1949, Taini moved back home to Rotorua, teaching and playing in the rep side until 1959.
What positions did you play in the team?
Oh, I started off as a centre, and then I moved to goal attack, playing 9-a-side this is. And when we changed to 7-a-side, I was too short to be playing as a shooter in the circle, so I went to wing attack and played wing attack.
Taini played through a period when major changes were happening in the game of women's outdoor basketball. At the end of the 1950s, an international governing body had formed, and there was pressure on New Zealand to follow the version of the game that England and Australia were playing. It required losing 2 of the 3 centre positions and becoming a 7-a-side game on a smaller court.
Was there some resistance to the change?
No, I don't think so, because it meant that we would be able to then play international games. Up until then, we only played Australia every now and again. And when we went to Australia, we played their rules, and when they came to us, they played our rules. So, you know, it wasn't really very satisfactory.
Coming to 1959, what brought about your decision to end your playing career?
Well, I thought I was getting a bit old, and I've also had a son to bring up.
Tom Jamison, Taini's only child, was born in 1953. He was named after his father Thomas, who Taini had met in Wellington while she was training to be a schoolteacher. Thomas was an upholsterer in Wellington, as well as a soccer and basketball player. He moved to Rotorua and coached Taini's indoor basketball team for a while, and the pair got together and were married. Tragically, just 3 months after their wedding, Thomas died in a basketball accident.
He was at a practice or playing a game and had crashed against the wall and hurt his head, and I think that's what it was, because he got these terrible headaches, yeah, and his vision went sort of, and they couldn't do anything here, so we went by ambulance up to Auckland, and he had a brain hemorrhage, was it? And he died in Auckland.
Taini was left to face the challenge of navigating the future for her and her unborn child, who would arrive later that year.
So this must have been...
Yeah, it was, really. But I had a lot of friends, and my in-laws were living next door, and I was able to go back to work to teach, and a cousin of mine looked after Tom during the week, and I had him weekends.
Taini continued with her devotion to sports, not just in playing, but also in administration roles for the Rotorua Outdoor Basketball Association.
If I'd had a family, and my husband had still lived, I probably wouldn't have devoted as much time to netball. I would have been a family person. But because I only had the one son, and I had all these people who helped me and looked after him when I had to go somewhere, and my mother and father would look after Tom if I went away to tournaments. If I hadn't had those people, I probably wouldn't have been able to spend as much time with netball as a whole.
One of Taini's mentors during that time, and for the rest of her life, was Mrs. Jean Lodge, who guided Taini and others through the various administration jobs she encouraged them into from the 1940s onwards.
Mrs. Lodge was actually there at the beginning with the formation of our Rotorua Association. She coached me and she encouraged me, and When I said, no, I can't do it, she would say, of course you can do it. It was her training, I think, with all of us, because we went into it blind, we didn't know anything, and her training and her organisation is just what we carried on with. My first job on that association was the record secretary, and had to collect all the team sheets. You had to write out your team sheet and pay your money to play for that day, and I had to check it off against the register, which was an awful job because I had all these papers and all these names I had to check off, and some of them only put their first name and some put their second name, and you know, it was really a job to do, but I enjoyed it. It went from there to secretary, I think. I was secretary for a few years, and then when we didn't have a treasurer, I was treasurer. Knew nothing about treasury, but I did my best.
Taini fulfilled many roles in the association, leaving a legacy of contribution in administration that spanned over 70 years.
1960, I started coaching the Rotorua rep team. I finished playing and took over the reins of coaching from Mrs. Jean Lodge. And really, in those days, we had no seminars to go by, not what to do. All I did was try and adapt and do the things that I was told to do as a rep player, and adapt it to putting it forward to my players. And I think it worked. Seemed to work. The most exciting tournament that we enjoyed the most was the 1962 tournament in Auckland, where we were playing in the first grade and drew with Canterbury for New Zealand Cup. We came home to a civic reception and all the doings. It was really exciting. The mayor was there and we had to march onto the stage, and he told us how wonderful we were, and we knew that already, of course. Yes, but it was a bit emotional as well, you know.
And that was the first time Rotorua had won the New Zealand?
Yeah, New Zealand Cup.
Taini successfully coached Rotorua to their first championship win in the A grade in 1962, and then took the championship 3 more times in 1964, 65 and 66. On the back of this success, Taini was appointed as coach of the national side.
And how did that differ from being coach of a rep team?
Well, you didn't have the girls within your grasp. You had to give them plans, give them things to do, tell them how to get fit, sort of have a check every now and again to see how their fitness was going. And
because these would be members from all around the country, wouldn't they?
That's right. And the first contact I had with that first team was 9 or 10 days before we left to go to Australia.
The 1967 World Championships were played in Perth, Australia. It was just the second world tournament for women's outdoor basketball. Australia had claimed the first title 4 years earlier in Eastbourne, London, and now had the advantage of being on home soil. Taini had never experienced international matches as a player, and now found herself leading her New Zealand team through 2 weeks of competition.
Our first game, I think, was the one that sticks in my mind, because it was South Africa, and we only beat them by 2 goals. We thought we might have trouble with teams from Trinidad and Jamaica because they were so tall and so athletic, but we flew past them. England was a bit of a worry as well, but we beat them quite convincingly.
Final match of the second World Tournament in the International Federation of Women's Basketball and Netball Associations. The 2 captains coming out, the wing attack for New Zealand, their captain Judy Blair, wing defence for Australia, Lynn Davey.
It was a close game.
Judy Blair for New Zealand, Joan Harnett, Earth Solomon, and Belay was good.
Very quick.
Passing. Earth Solomon hasn't missed many. The girl from Rotorua.
We played a defensive zoning game. We always did, because that's what Rotorua played, and they knew what we were doing anyway, because we were the first team. to play a zone and nobody really could work out what we were doing.
Switch. They still can't get in this New Zealand zone defence.
Right across the game.
They couldn't get through. They couldn't get through the zone, Australia.
This is the job that Billy Irwin, Tilly Verco and Pam Hamilton have done so effectively.
The moment when we could see the timekeeper walking up and down, the manager, Edna Yates, said, we've got it, we've got it. And I said, what have we got? She's, we've got it. Look, she's counting down.
There's the whistle to finish the match. And with great jubilation in the New Zealand camp, New Zealand wins 40-34. Looks like a haka forming up in the background, and I think that it's a very elated lot of New Zealanders.
You know, we'd won it. Couldn't believe it.
Well, I was going to say, did you expect to do so well?
Not really, because I was, really hadn't had much experience as a coach. But we had good players. We had excellent players.
New Zealand, world champions for the very first time. It was a proud moment for women's sport in New Zealand and became the crowning moment of Taini's career. What's also impressive today is that the zone defensive system which Taini utilised from her Rotorua representative side's defensive structure became synonymous with the New Zealand way and is the style that the Silver Ferns still use today. 4 years later, Taini went to the third World Tournament as coach of the New Zealand team. But in a developing and intensifying netball rivalry, they lost to Australia in the final. When she concluded her time as coach in 1971, Taini finished with 18 wins from 20 matches, a 90% win rate, which stands as the highest win rate achieved by any Silver Ferns coach to this day. She continued to serve the Rotorua Netball Association and became president in 1980, a position she held until 2001. Her legacy of service to the netball community in Rotorua and success in coaching saw her receive a New Zealand Service Award, as well as being inducted into the New Zealand and Māori Sports Hall of Fames. She was made an Officer of the Order of the British Empire and a Netball New Zealand Life member. And in 2008, the Taini Jamison Trophy was named in her honour. Each year on the netballing calendar, the Taini Jamison Trophy is contested for between the Silver Ferns and a visiting international team, keeping the memory of her service and success alive in the minds of players and public in netballing circles throughout generations. This episode was made by Netball New Zealand. Special thanks to the Alexander Turnbull Library and interviewer of the original recordings, Mari Burgess. 1967 World Tournament television coverage audio, World Netball. Produced and edited by Dave Weston. Historical fact-checking by Todd Miller and Margaret Henley. Audio mixed by 1H. And narration by Kieran Bingham.